the sausages produced by the great businesses in his constituency. The framework ends the ban on chilled meats like sausages and seasoned lamb joints, meaning that supermarket shelves in Northern Ireland will be able to stock the products customers want and have had access to for years.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But the reality is for my constituents and for example, McCartney's Delicatessen in Moira, that whilst they can bring sausages from Yorkshire or from any other part of the United Kingdom that are made to British standards, the sausages they make in Northern Ireland, part of the United Kingdom, have to be made to EU standards because EU law applies for all manufactured goods in Northern Ireland. So why is it right to bring sausages from Great Britain to Northern Ireland and sell them in Northern Ireland, but it's not right to sell British sausages made in Northern Ireland in Northern Ireland?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I understand the force and passion with which he makes this point, but he knows that what we've done is reduce the extent of EU law in Northern Ireland to the absolute minimum consistent with keeping open an infrastructure-free border with the Republic of Ireland. And I appreciate that this is a compromise which for many people will go too far, but I believe that it is the right decision in these circumstances.
Can I just say to the member, please take notes of questions. Sir Geoffrey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But the reality is, Mr. Speaker, that Northern Ireland's place within the UK internal market has not been fully restored by the Windsor Framework because EU law applies for all manufactured goods in Northern Ireland, despite the fact that of £77 billion worth of goods manufactured in Northern Ireland, 65 billion are sold in the United Kingdom, and yet all of those goods must comply with EU law regardless of where they are sold. Can't we go back to the proposals in the protocol bill, which mean that UK law applies unless a business wants to trade with EU, in which case they must follow EU law?
Mr. Speaker, on the proposal for dual regulation, that was not what constituent businesses in Northern Ireland wanted. And, you know, at some point, even unrelenting figures like myself do need to compromise and give the voters what they want. But what I would say to him is that I recognise that compromise is extremely difficult. And we are in a position where we've got an opportunity to move forwards together. He knows, as I know, I'm sure, that manufacturing of most of the kind of goods to which he's referring is done to international standards. And so I think in all of the circumstances, this is a reasonable compromise for Northern Ireland.
Teresa Villiers.
Question number 3, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Number 4, sir. I think, Mr. Speaker, the Northern Ireland economy has the ingredients required for economic success: exceptional talent, creativity, innovation and a healthy spirit of private sector entrepreneurship. Last week, the Secretary of State was delighted to visit the United States, and next week I'll be visiting the USA and Canada to promote the excellent investment opportunities in Northern Ireland. We are, of course, also planning an investment summit.
Teresa Villiers.
One of the ways to attract foreign direct investment is by creating the right regulatory climate. And the Minister has been a very strong advocate for post-Brexit regulatory reform to make our rules more competitive, more targeted, more agile, more modern. So when does he think we'll get to the position where we can do that in Northern Ireland in the same way Brexit allows us to do it in Great Britain?
Also, she and I have walked a long way in these various battles together, and she knows very well what she asks me. In relation to goods, we do have to make sure we can keep open that infrastructure-free border north-south. But what I would say is that the unique position of Northern Ireland is that on services regulation, Northern Ireland will be subject to UK law and UK trade agreements. So where we have comparative advantage, particularly in Northern Ireland on issues like fintech, they'll be subject to UK law and UK regulation, and they'll have access to global markets through the kind of trade agreements in services which it's in all of our interests to strike to serve the comparative advantage of the whole UK. This is the unique opportunity now facing Northern Ireland. I want us all to seize it in every way we can.
Gregory Campbell.
Mr. Speaker, Northern Ireland now has the highest percentage accessibility for gigabit-capable broadband in the UK, twice that of the Republic of Ireland, and one of the highest in the world. Will he ensure that the energy infrastructure is such to complement this, thereby offering one of the best inward investment and indigenous business opportunities anywhere in the world?
Well, Mr. Speaker, he will know that energy is devolved. And I hope that he will join me in doing everything possible to ensure that the maximum investment can be made in energy in Northern Ireland, and he knows exactly what he and his colleagues need to do to help me to serve him and serve Northern Ireland, and that is, of course, to restore the devolved institutions.
John Barron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree that in restoring the balance of the Belfast Agreement, the best way is to pass the Windsor Framework today in this place, that we have to be pragmatic, and we have to open our eyes to the many opportunities, courtesy of inward investment, that will then follow for the benefit of all communities in the province?
Mr. Speaker, I agree with him strongly. The reality is that the Windsor Framework is a dramatic improvement on the protocol. I don't think anyone can reasonably argue otherwise. Of course, it includes compromises. Neither I nor my right honourable friend nor the Prime Minister is suggesting that it doesn't. The question that everyone needs to answer is whether this is a step forward for Northern Ireland. I'm absolutely sure that it is, and I agree with him.
Stephen Farray.
Tourism spending is also very important. The Minister will be aware that the Northern Ireland Tourist Alliance is very concerned about the application of the forthcoming electronic travel authorisation on the sector in Northern Ireland, given our unique marketing and our unique offer. So will the Minister work with the Home Office to try to find a practical solution to this problem?
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I'm well aware of the case that he makes, and of course we're in conversation with colleagues from the Home Office. The government's position is that we're determined to make sure that tourists understand that they will need to comply with UK immigration requirements to visit the UK, and that will mean that they will need that travel authorisation to go to Northern Ireland. I am aware of the concerns of tourism authorities, north and south, and indeed the concerns of the Irish government. We continue to take those seriously as we talk with the Home Office.
Thames spokesperson. Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr.
Please. Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Jonathan Haskell, external member of the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee, has estimated that Brexit has resulted in the loss of approximately £29 billion of business investment to the UK as a whole. Does the Minister believe that the Windsor Framework will undo that proportion of the damage that has been done to the Northern Irish economy? And if so, why does he consider that the market access that that framework underpins is good enough for one part of the United Kingdom, but not good enough for the rest of us?
Mr. Speaker, I'm honoured that he should think that on the fly I would be able to do my own economic modelling on that subject. But what I would say to him is that it is undoubtedly the case that the political turmoil of the last several years has been unhelpful. But what I would say to him, and it should be a salutary lesson to everybody on his benches, that it is extremely important that when the public vote for a thing, that they get the thing they voted for. And the public voted for the whole UK to stay together, in a once-in-a-generation referendum on Scottish independence, and then the UK as a whole voted to leave the European Union, and that's what we'll deliver.
Mark Fletcher. Question number 5, please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my honourable friend for his question. The Northern Ireland Troubles Legacy and Reconciliation Bill, which continues its passage through Parliament, will establish an independent body to conduct reviews into trouble-related deaths and serious injury, with the primary objective of providing information to families, victims and survivors. The legislation seeks to ensure the process for dealing with the past focuses on measures that can deliver positive outcomes for as many people affected by the Troubles as possible.
Mark Fletcher.
Legacy is an extremely complex and sensitive issue. In setting up an effective information recovery process, we must ensure that power is in the hands of victims and families rather than the perpetrators. So what consultations has his department had with victims and their families to ensure the right balance is achieved?
Can I thank my honourable friend for his question? He's absolutely right that legacy remains a highly complex and difficult issue. And the government's absolutely determined to deliver mechanisms that provide better outcomes for those most affected by the Troubles, including victims and their families. And I know that no solution that we will ever find will be perfect or easy, but we're working tirelessly to find a practical way forward via the Legacy Bill. As for engagement, myself and my ministerial colleagues have had over 60, nearly 70 engagements with groups and individuals concerning this, and we continue to meet people on a regular basis.
Now, the Minister, Chris Elmore.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Government has made some changes to the Legacy Bill during its passage in this House. If the changes are not enough and all Northern Ireland parties vote against it again on its return to the House, will the Minister commit to a different approach, as reconciliation cannot be imposed on Northern Ireland?
I thank the honourable gentleman, who I welcome to his place, and I hope the Minister, the Shadow Minister he's replacing, is all is well. And he's got big shoes to fill, so it's a good start. But I thank him for noticing what's going on in the other place, because in the other place we've already tabled amendments that seek to address a number of key issues that have been raised by the stakeholders that we've been meeting, including ECHR compliance, strengthening the Commission's independence, sanctions for individuals found guilty of lying and to the Commission, and creating stronger incentives for individuals to engage with the Commission. And we will be bringing forward more such amendments at report stage, where I hope we can get everybody on board, or at least to acknowledge that we're doing a decent job.
Number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the UK Government is steadfastly committed to the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and the institutions and rights established by it. We recognise the importance of the rights, safeguards and equality of opportunity provisions within the agreement to the people of Northern Ireland, and the Secretary of State discusses the subject regularly with Cabinet colleagues.
Ellie Reeves.
The Good Friday Agreement led to peace in Northern Ireland and enshrined human rights into Northern Irish law. Yet the Tories' Bill of Rights is nothing but a rights removal bill. Does the Minister therefore recognise that the proposed bill would be a breach of an international agreement, the Good Friday Agreement?
No, not at all. I confess I thought she was going to ask me about the Bill of Rights provisions in the agreement itself, but she ought to know that the parties have been working together towards that Bill of Rights, and it will need consensus to deliver a framework in Northern Ireland. But of course the UK continues to be committed to the ECHR.
Martin Day.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I will answer questions. The Leader of the Opposition knows how much this Parliament likes it when you group questions together. With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 7, 10 and 13 together. The Windsor Framework restores the free flow of trade from Great Britain to Northern Ireland through a green lane, guarantees unfettered access to Northern Ireland's businesses to the UK market on a permanent basis, and a whole host of other benefits which we've got.
Thank you. The world's most exciting economic zone is how the Prime Minister described Northern Ireland being in the UK market and having access to the European market. Does the Secretary of State agree with that assessment? And if he does that not mean that the rest of the UK's nations are at a disadvantage, being less exciting, only being part of the UK market?
I thank him for acknowledging what a good deal the Windsor Framework is. And as the Prime Minister has said, Northern Ireland will now be in the unique position of being part of the UK internal market, the 5th biggest market in the world, but also enjoying the EU single market. And as part of the UK, Northern Ireland's businesses and consumers are able to benefit from the new trade agreements we are able to negotiate and the new UK regulatory regime for trade and services that we can do outside of being members of the European Union.
Kirsten Oswald.
Mr. Speaker, by the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister's own admission, Northern Ireland is in a better economic position than the rest of the UK because of its place in the European single market. Now, the Prime Minister also said this would lead to more companies investing in Northern Ireland, and that won't be new money. So if companies are investing more in Northern Ireland, does he see that that means that they'll be investing less in the rest of the UK? Would the Secretary of State see that as a win-win?
And I hadn't even answered the question. I think the Honourable Lady has kind of missed the point. There's a huge amount. Okay, no, she has completely missed the point because there is a huge amount of inward investment that wants to flow into Northern Ireland from outside of these isles. And yes, we should be welcoming inward investment into Northern Ireland because prosperity builds on the peace and stability that Belfast Good Friday Agreement has brought for the last 25 years, which is why we should all welcome the Windsor Framework.
And then Keza.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Scotland, like Northern Ireland, rejected Brexit. Both were dragged out of the EU despite voting Remain. Yet, Northern Ireland has retained access to the EU single market and the economic benefits that it brings. So does the Minister agree that Scotland should have a similar deal to be as economically competitive as Northern Ireland?
I thank you for a question, and with the greatest respect, the positions of Northern Ireland and the other nations of the UK are, as I've said before, not completely comparable. Northern Ireland is undoubtedly a wonderful place, but it has a complex and troubled history, and we've talked about the need and the wonders of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, celebrating its 25th, marking its 25th anniversary. But it also has a land border, the only one between the UK and the EU. That has brought added complications, which the Windsor Framework is in place, and the Windsor Framework is a place to safeguard the achievements of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and the hard-won gains of the peace process. It recognises these unique circumstances, including the all-Ireland dimensions of economic life between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and the need to avoid a hard border.
Dr. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I strongly support the Windsor Framework and welcome the veterinary and SPS measures. Can my right honourable friend update the House on progress towards securing the long-term supply of veterinary medicines in Northern Ireland and also smoothing the safe movement of animals between GB and Northern Ireland to include not only pets but also farm animals and horses?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. He knows a great deal about this subject. As he knows, there is a grace period in place until the end of December 2025 on veterinary medicines. I would like to think that the new atmosphere that has been created between the United Kingdom and the European Union as we move forward has demonstrated that we can talk and negotiate about these things, and we fully expect to be able to be in a position to address all of his concerns in good time.
Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, I'd like to point out that live subtitles and British Sign Language interpretation of proceedings are available to watch on parliamentlive.tv. We start with questions to Prime Minister Joe Gideon.
Question 1, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Joe Gideon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow is the National Day of Reflection, a Marie Curie-led initiative bringing together communities across the UK to remember family, friends, neighbours and colleagues we have lost. Will the Prime Minister join me in thanking Stoke City Council for supporting my call for a postbox to heaven in Carmountdside Cemetery, and on the second anniversary of the tragic death of my constituent, 2-year-old Harper Lee Fanthorpe, who swallowed a button battery, will he thank her courageous mother, Stacey, for leading the campaign to raise awareness of the dangers of button batteries? And will he back my call for legislation to ensure greater product safety?
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course I join my honourable friend in thanking Stoke City Council. I'm very sorry to hear of Harper Lee's tragic case, and my thoughts are with her friends and family, and particularly her mother Stacey. And we are aware of the concerns about button batteries. The law is very clear that products available in the UK must be safe. The Office for Product and Safety Standards has published guidance on exactly this for manufacturers and is working with the Child Accident Prevention Trust to educate parents and childcare professionals on button baton safety.
Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today we remember the innocent lives lost 6 years ago in a terror attack on Westminster Bridge. Amongst those tragically killed was PC Keith Palmer, who sacrificed his life to protect others. Police officers up and down the country work tirelessly every day to keep us safe, and we thank them for that. But as we saw this week, those brave officers are being let down. Dame Louise Casey found institutional homophobia, misogyny and racism in the Metropolitan Police. I accept those findings in full. Does the Prime Minister?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, I join with the honourable gentleman paying tribute to PC Palmer and indeed all the other police officers who have lost their lives serving and those who do so much to keep us safe. I was appalled, Mr. Speaker, to read the descriptions of the abhorrent cases of officers who have betrayed the public's trust and abused their powers. And let me be clear, It is and was unacceptable and should never have happened. We have taken a series of steps already, and the government will also now work with the Mayor and the Metropolitan Commissioner to ensure that culture, standards and behaviour all improve. At the heart of this matter are the people whose lives have been ruined by what has happened, and I know the whole House will agree with me that it is imperative that the Met works hard to regain the trust of the people it is privileged to serve.
Keir Starmer.
I take it from that answer that the Prime Minister does accept the Casey findings in full, including the institutional failures. Because nobody reading the Casey report can be left in any doubt about how serious this is, and doubt for a second that it's restricted to the Met. The report lays bare how those unfit to join the police are aided by patchwork vetting systems that leave the door open. If the government backed Labour's plan for proper mandatory national vetting, we could end the farce that sees different police recruitment standards in different forces. Will he back that plan so we can make speedy progress?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, there's no need to back that plan because we're already taking action to tackle the issues that are raised in the Casey report. And it was actually 2 months ago. It was 2 months ago that I met with Dame Louise Casey and the Metropolitan Commissioner, and we introduced a series of measures. For instance, the College of Policing is currently updating the statutory code of practice for police officer vetting that all forces legally have to follow. All police forces are in the process of checking their officers against the Police National Database, and in weeks, Her Majesty's Independent Inspectorate will report back on their re-inspection of all forces vetting procedures. Now, these steps, of course, won't undo the terrible damage that have been previously committed, but we owe this action and more to the victims and survivors to ensure that such tragedies never happen again.
Well, the problem with the Prime Minister's answer is what he's referring to isn't mandatory. How can it possibly be right to have different standards for recruitment in different police forces? No wonder the Casey report criticised what she calls the government's hands-off attitude to policing over the last 13 years. But let's call it what it really is: sheer negligence. The report also exposes chronic failures by the police to deal with rape cases, with officers using, and I quote, overstuffed or broken fridges containing the rape kits of victims. On his watch, rape charges are 1.6%. Yet the government still hasn't backed Labour's plan to have proper, high-quality rape and serious sexual offences units in every police force. Why not?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what Louise Casey also says is that primary public accountability of the Met sits with the Mayor of London. She described that relationship between the Mayor and the Met as, in her words, dysfunctional. But when it comes... So I hope when he stands up, he will also confirm to the House that he will take up these matters with the Labour Mayor of London so that he plays his part. But Mr. Speaker, the way rape victims were treated by the criminal justice system wasn't good enough, and that's why the government published an ambitious rape review action plan. It's right that we've extended Operation Sorteria across all police forces in the country. We've tripled the number of independent sexual violence advisors. We've improved the process of collecting phone evidence and being cross-examined. And since 2010, we've quadrupled funding for victim support services. That is a Conservative government doing everything we can to support victims and tackle predators.
People are fed up to the back teeth with a government that never takes responsibility and just tries to blame everyone. They can shout if they're proud of the fact that over 98% of rapists are never put before. If they want to shout about that, that's their record. Let them shout about it. You should be ashamed of yourself. The truth is simple. After 13 years of Tory government, crime is out of control and people are paying the price. Before Christmas, the BBC reported the shocking case of a woman in Armthorpe who'd been beaten with a baseball bat by burglars 3 years ago. Nobody had been charged with that burglary, and she couldn't sleep at night. Under their watch, tragically, that's not an unusual case. So can the Prime Minister tell us what's the charge rate for theft and burglary across the country?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, actually, since 2019, neighbourhood crime is down by 25%. But he asked rightly about what's happening with rape cases. So let me just tell him that we are on track to meet our target of doubling the number of rape cases that are reaching our courts. Since the Rape Review Action Plan was published, we've seen police referrals double. We've seen charges double. And last year, there was a 65% increase in rape convictions. Yes. But importantly, we also changed the law to ensure that rapists would spend more time in prison. But what did his shadow policing minister say? Prison doesn't prevent crime. It tells you everything that you need to know about the Labour Party. You can't trust them to keep Britain safe.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister stands there and pretends that everything's fine. He is so totally out of touch. He needs to get out of Westminster, get out of Kensington, and Mr. Speaker, I don't think...
It's a big day today in the House, and it's a very important day. We do want to make progress. Holding us up is not advantageous to any of us.
Mr. Speaker, he needs to get out of Westminster, get out of Kensington, and I don't mean to Malibu, to the streets of Britain. Go there and tell people it's all fine and see what reaction he gets. The answer he didn't want to give, although he knows it, is 4% of cases, 4% of burglary charges are charged, 96% of theft and burglary cases not even going before the courts. Burglars twice as likely to get away with it now as they were a decade ago. They should be ashamed of that record. And that cul-de-sac in Armthorpe has apparently seen 10 burglaries in 18 months, but only one of them has resulted in a prosecution. So rather than boasting and blaming others, why doesn't he tell the country when he's going to get the theft and burglary charge rate back to where it was before they wrecked policing?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, let me say North Yorkshire's a lot further away than North London.
Can I say, I'd like the lines as well, but I prefer to hear them rather than jeering. Come on, Prime Minister. Mister. Now then, we are going to make progress. Mr. Shelbrooke will be buying the teas in the tea room if we're not careful. Come on, Prime
Minister. There'll be Yorkshire teas, Mr. Speaker. But since the Conservatives came into power, crime is down 50%, Mr. Speaker. Violent crime down 40%. Burglary, the Honourable Gentleman mentioned burglary down 56%. Why? Because we've recruited 20,000 more police officers. We've given them the powers to tackle crime, and we've kept serious offenders in prison for longer. All they've done is vote against greater protections for emergency workers. They've opposed tougher sentences for violent criminals, and they are failing to give the police the powers that they need. It's the same old Labour, soft on crime, soft on criminals.
The only criminal investigation he's ever been involved in is the one that found him guilty of breaking the law. I've prosecuted countless rapists. On the Prime Minister, I want tougher...
Hold on. I am determined to hear the questions, whether it's the Leader of the Opposition, the Prime Minister, so I can... Sorry. I think you've got your first customer for tea, Mr. Kurtz. We keep having this little problem. We'll have no more. No, then, just a moment. So please, let's get through and let's just show some respect to both people at dispatch boxes. Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've prosecuted countless rapists and I support tougher sentences. But you have to catch the criminals first. And when 98% of rapists are not even being put before the court, That's a massive failure on the government. And if he wants to go to Armthorpe, which is in Yorkshire, why doesn't he go to that cul-de-sac when he gets out and about in Yorkshire and ask them about those 10 burglaries that haven't been prosecuted? The reality is, after 13 years of Tory government, they've done nothing on standards, neighbourhood policing has been shattered, and burglars and rapists walk the streets with impunity. It's the same every week from the Prime Minister, whether it's the cost of living crisis, crime running out of control, or the state of the NHS. Why is his answer always to tell this British people they've never had it so good?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me just address the issue the honourable gentleman raised, because I said at the time I respected the decision the police reached and I offered an unreserved apology. But for the avoidance of doubt, Mr. Speaker, at the moment that happened, there was a full investigation by a very senior civil servant. The findings of which confirmed that I had no advance knowledge about what had been planned, having arrived early for a meeting. But he doesn't need me to tell him that. He's probably spoken to the report's author much more frequently than I have.
Look, the Prime Minister needs to answer the question. He doesn't need you to... I don't think we need any more. Let's keep it that way. Prime Minister.
Look, Mr. Speaker, we're getting on. We're halving inflation by paying 50% of people's energy bills and freezing fuel duty. We're cutting...
And it's the same for this side. Mr. Gwynne, I don't need any more from the backbenches here either. Can I just say, let's calm... Mr. Fabricant, not again. I'm just quite seriously... Today's a very big day, some important decisions are going to be taken. So please, I want to get this House moving on. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we're also cutting NHS waiting lists by resolving pay disputes and getting doctors back to work. And, Mr. Speaker, we're stopping the boats with a new bill to tackle illegal migration. That's a Conservative government delivering on the people's priorities.
Holly Mumby-Croft. Holly Mumby-Croft.
Can I thank my honourable friend, the Prime Minister, for the efforts he has made to support the UK's steel industry? Can I tell him that we remain very concerned about job losses at British Steel in Scunthorpe? So will he today reassure my constituents in North Lincolnshire that we will never see the end of UK steelmaking under his watch?
Mr. Speaker, the UK steel industry can have no greater champion than my honourable friend. And I know that this must be a concerning time for British Steel employees, and we stand ready to work with her to support them. Now, she's right, industrial sectors, including steel, have been able to bid into competitive government funds worth £1 billion to help support them to cut emissions and become more energy efficient. And the government's recently announced British Industry Supercharger Fund can help boost competitiveness in UK's key energy-intensive industries. And I look forward to working with her to ensure a thriving steel industry in our United Kingdom.
Leader of the SNP, Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to begin by paying tribute to PC Palmer, who so tragically lost his life in defence of this Parliament and indeed what we all stand for, democracy. Mr. Speaker, what worries the Prime Minister most about Brexit right now? Is it the likely 4% hit to UK productivity, or is it 3 former Tory leaders planning to vote down his deal this afternoon?
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the Windsor Framework represents.
Just to help the chamber, just help everybody. I understand it's true. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Windsor Framework represents a good deal for the people and families and businesses of Northern Ireland. It restores the balance of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and ensures Northern Ireland's place in our precious union. But what I would say to him, I was more intrigued to see the words of his own party's president, who just this past week have described his own party as being, in their words, in a tremendous mess.
Stephen Flynn. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that whilst Westminster is once again consumed by the damage being caused by Brexit, the public at home are facing the biggest fall in living standards ever, the highest tax burden since the end of the Second World War, and inflation at 10.4%. When are the Conservative Party, and indeed the Labour Party, going to realise that Brexit can't work?
Mr. Speaker, the actions that this government is taking are ensuring that fully half of most families' energy bills are being supported by this government. We're also making sure that we're delivering for people with the cutting NHS waiting lists, and that's something that we're happy to work with the Scottish Government to learn and share best practice with them on. But we're also, Mr. Speaker, delivering on the people's #1 priority, which is to stop the boats and end illegal migration.
Unemployment claimant rate has declined significantly over the last decade, but there are still vacancies to fill and specific groups to help. And on Monday, the Employment Minister and I visited Arnold Job Centre, where Kelsey and her team are welcoming local employers to speak directly to job seekers, and a dedicated 50-plus work coach is getting more from that bracket into work. So would my right honourable friend join me in congratulating the staff at Arnold and other job centres across the country on the proactive work that they're doing, and when time allows, would you come to visit Arnold Job Centre in person to see the great work they're doing?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend and join him in thanking all the staff at Arnold Job Centre for their hard work. I shall keep his kind invitation to visit in mind. He mentioned the over 50s. And he mentioned the over 50s, or as my right honourable friend the Chancellor described them, are more experienced workers. And he was right to focus on them, because together with the Work and Pension Secretary, we are putting in place a range of measures to help support them to return to and stay in the labour market. And that is something that not only will help us continue to bring inflation down, but will support those people to have healthy, productive, fulfilling lives.
Neil Hamby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK Government recently confirmed that Scotland generated and sent south 35 billion kilowatt hours of energy in 2021. That number will rise to 124 billion in less than 8 years' time. For this multi-billion-pound bounty, Scotland will see no revenue, no manufacturing or supply chain jobs. In our land of energy plenty, why should our people be cold and hungry and businesses failing as a result of his government's robbery? So what has the Prime Minister to say in defence of this naked exploitation of Scotland's people and its resources?
Mr. Speaker, actually, this government is a strong supporter of Scotland's North Sea oil and gas industry. And actually, it's the economically illiterate policy of, I think, almost all opposition parties to prohibit any new exploration of fossil fuels in the North Sea, which would have us then pay billions of pounds to foreign energy companies and then ship that energy here with twice the carbon emissions. It is a completely absurd policy, Mr. Speaker, that's bad for our security, it's bad for our economy, and that's why we're better off with the Conservatives in charge.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. The island has been getting a better deal in recent years, and I thank the Prime Minister for that, especially before he was a Prime Minister, when he was working with me in different roles when he was in government to make that happen, and I'm grateful. However, the island remains the only sizeable island in the UK without a fixed link, and separated from the mainland by sea, which does not receive a funding uplift to support local government services. And this injustice has been ongoing now for 50 years. And all the evidence, Mr. Speaker, shows that it costs more to provide local services on an island than on the mainland. Will the Prime Minister work with me and his ministers to overcome this injustice this year? Thank you.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for his continued campaigning on behalf of his constituents. It was a pleasure to spend many happy childhood holidays on the island, and I enjoyed visiting him more recently there as well. The Isle of Wight Council will benefit from a 10% increase in their funding in cash terms for the next financial year, and have been awarded an additional £1 million in recognition of the unique circumstances of the island, as my honourable friend points out. But I will ensure that he does get a meeting with the Minister for Local Government to carry on the good work that he and I started and make sure that his local constituents get the support that they need.
Rem Stringer.
Mr. Speaker, we now know from the Telegraph's lockdown files that during COVID, at the very heart of government, science wasn't being followed and rational discourse had been abandoned. This had dire consequences for children's education, mortality rates amongst the elderly, the economy and access to the health service. Lessons must be learnt, Mr. Speaker, but we can't wait 10 years for the independent inquiry to tell us what we should do next time when the inevitable epidemic arrives. Will the Prime Minister agree to a short-term focused inquiry that can give us recommendations so that we do better next time?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as with any public inquiry, the process and timing of the inquiry stages are for the independent chair to decide. As Baroness Hallett has previously set out, she intends to gather written evidence throughout this year, with public hearings also starting this year. They held a preliminary hearing in February which covered pandemic preparedness and resilience, and they've set out dates for preliminary hearings into core political and administrative decision-making across the UK throughout this month. But most importantly, the honourable gentleman will recognise it is an independent inquiry, and it's for the independent chair to set the terms.
Jerome May.
Mr. Speaker, more than 1.5 million people living outside London stand to be impacted by the Mayor's new London-wide ultra-low emission zone. Labour and the Liberal Democrats, they're all for the ULEZ charge. They don't care about the cost of living crisis. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that the best way to protect commuters and small businesses from the spread of this unfair £12.50 a day tax is to vote Conservative on May the 4th?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and I think he also failed to mention that just this week we've seen Labour in Wales introduce more plans for further road charging as well, increasing cost pressures for public and businesses. And I'd urge the parties opposite to listen and stand up for the public and small businesses, just as the Conservatives do.
Hannah Bardell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. When my wee brother was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis 8 years ago, it's fair to say it turned our lives upside down. I'm incredibly proud of the man he is and all that he's achieved whilst living with this life-limiting condition. And my Livingston constituent, Stephen Sharp, manages local football team the Fulshay in Stonyburn. He has Crohn's disease and he lives with a stoma. And he's like many of our constituents up and down the UK, living with a life-limiting condition, trying to provide for their families whilst holding down jobs with a condition and disease that wreaks havoc on their body. So, Mr. Speaker, given 1 in 4 people wait more than a year for diagnosis, will the Prime Minister and indeed the House support the campaign to cut the crap and get diagnosed early for Crohn's and colitis? And would he meet with my constituent Stephen and I to look at what more can be done for awareness, research and funding?
Can I thank the honourable lady for her question and pay tribute to, I think, her brother and also Stephen for everything that they're doing to raise awareness of this issue. I'd be very happy to meet with her and Stephen. It is something that I am familiar with, and it is a very difficult condition for people to live with, and it's right that they get the support and attention that they deserve, and I look forward to that discussion with her.
Sir Jeremy Wright.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Jamie Scott spent 4 weeks in a coma and remains seriously disabled as a result of a COVID vaccination. He and his family continue to believe that mass vaccination is the right policy, but it must also surely be right to ensure that that tiny minority who are seriously injured as a result are properly compensated. In the absence of court cases it's in no one's interests to litigate, the current limit on compensation is £120,000, even for very serious and lifelong injury, and anyone who is disabled by less than 60% gets nothing at all. That cannot be right. Will my right honourable friend look urgently at changing it?
Mr. Speaker, it is important to start by recognising the importance of vaccines in protecting us all, and not least the fantastic rollout of the COVID vaccines across the UK. But I am very sorry to hear about the case that my right honourable friend raises. In the extremely rare case of a potential injury from a vaccine covered by the scheme, a one-off payment can be awarded. This is not designed to be a compensation scheme, and it does not prevent the injured person in pursuing a legal compensation claim with the vaccine manufacturer. We are taking steps to reform vaccine damage payment schemes by modernising the operations and providing more timely outcomes. But of course, I'll be happy to talk to the honourable gentleman further about it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The new inflation stats this morning show food inflation is at 18%, the highest in 45 years. Millions are living in food and fuel poverty because of this government's failures and political decisions to enable grotesque profiteering at the expense of our communities. How on earth can the Prime Minister claim his plan is working, or is it in his eyes? Is it a success that so many people are struggling with their weekly food shop?
Mr. Speaker, the figures that have been recently published show that since 2010, there are 2 million fewer people living in poverty, thanks to the actions of this and previous Conservative governments. Of course, no one wants to see people struggling with week-to-week bills like food, which is why it is so imperative we stick to our economic plan. And as the OBR have said, we are on track to halve inflation by the end of this year. That is the most important thing we can do to ease the burden on people. And in the meantime, we have a range of programmes, whether that's free school meals or indeed the holiday activities and food programme, to provide support to the most vulnerable families who need our help.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 60 million to improve transport links from Wednesbury to the rest of Black Country, 4 million for Wednesbury High Street, and last week, the most important part of the budget, the £22.5 million to leaven up Tipton Town Centre. Mr. Speaker, this government has put a vote of confidence in my communities, one they've not had for nearly 50 years. Can I ask my right honourable friend, delivery is going to be absolutely key on these projects, because can he ensure, using his good office, that we absolutely get this delivered on time and realise the potential of my communities in Tipton and Wednesbury?
Well, can I pay tribute to my honourable friend for his tireless campaigning on behalf of his local communities. I'm delighted that we are investing across the West Midlands, but particularly in places like Wednesbury and Tipton. And again, we will work with him to ensure that those investments are indeed delivered, working with the local councils, Transport for West Midlands and the West Midland Combined Authority. Those investments are going to transform people's lives and spread opportunity in his area, and he deserves enormous credit for making that happen.
Very grateful, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, households in Gateshead have seen their energy bills triple over the last 2 years. They've endured not just the energy unit price increase, but the daily electricity standing charges increase from an average of 22 pence in 2019 to 58 pence from next month, an increase of 155% in standing charges, over £200 per year. To many of my constituents, particularly those in low-income households, this seems like a company tax just for having the temerity to be connected to the network. And these schemes will continue long after energy support schemes have ended. So will the Prime Minister commit to ending the regressive increases in standing charges and instruct Ofgem to return them to 2019 levels, or even end them completely?
Mr. Speaker, thanks to the Chancellor, the government is providing support to a typical household energy bill, around half of that bill over the winter, support that was extended in the budget and will be worth £1,500 to a typical family. But we went further, Mr. Speaker, for those most vulnerable families. As the Chancellor announced, we will be ending the discrepancy between unit charges for those on prepayment meters, something that many in this House have called for, and also providing generous cost of living payments worth £900 to the most vulnerable families.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, two of my constituents, George and Carol Ellis, are my guests here in the gallery today. Sadly, in 2021, their son died by suicide. George was a member of the Yorkshire Regiment and had become depressed following one of his comrades who had taken his own life. In memory of George, Adrian and Carol have set up a support group which marries up one veteran with another who is able to talk through and hopefully help them. The support group is called get emotions out after George. Would the Prime Minister join me in offering condolences to Adrian and Carol, and also his support for the work that they're now doing?
Can I join my honourable friend in sending my and the whole House's condolences to George's friends and family, and thank his parents for the brave work they are doing to raise awareness of veterans' mental health. Support is available for anyone experiencing suicidal thoughts, including from the Samaritans helpline. And thanks to the excellent work of my honourable friend, the Veterans Minister, we are working specifically to support veterans' mental health through Op Courage, which is a bespoke mental health and wellbeing service for veterans in the NHS, backed by considerable funding, which was increased in the recent budget, and that fully integrated service will be launched next month. But again, I pay tribute to George's parents for all the incredible work that they are doing.
Alison Thulis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent, Mariam Amiri, came to the UK from Afghanistan on a spousal visa back in 2016. The Home Office have just refused her renewal and advised she should return to Afghanistan. Mariam is an educator, due to start a university course in September. She's a valued community activist. She's a vocal opponent of the Taliban. She is married to a man who worked for British forces, and her family is currently being persecuted in Afghanistan. She's been trying to get them here since Afghanistan fell. Can the Prime Minister think of any barriers or hardships Mariam might face in returning to a country where there is not even any means of applying for a visa? And will he personally intervene, as the Immigration Minister is yet to reply to me, despite raising this 3 weeks ago?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, obviously it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on an individual's visa case, but I will ensure that the honourable lady gets a response from the Home Office with regard to that particular case.
Len Saxby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Prime Minister to pay tribute to and congratulate my constituent, Max Woozy, best known as the boy in the tent, whose 3-year adventure camping outside is drawing to a close. To date, he has raised over £750,000 for the excellent North Devon Hospice, and will my right honourable friend wish everyone taking part in his final adventure, a camping festival at Broomhill Estate, great success.
Well, can I join my honourable friend in paying tribute to Max and everyone else taking part in this fantastic initiative, and congratulate them on raising such a considerable sum of money for a very worthy local cause, and I look forward to hearing how the rest of it goes, but very well done.
Final question, Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While the Treasury receives an additional £65 billion revenue from Scotland's oil and gas, they've only allocated £20 billion for carbon capture, but nothing for Scotland. They've cut the renewable energy budget by a third. They've only allocated £10 million for Scotland's world-leading tidal stream and failed to back pumped storage hydro. But yet they want us to contribute our share towards the £35 billion Sizewell C nuclear power station. Isn't it the case that within the Union, Scotland is the energy, but Westminster takes the powers?
Mr. Speaker, not only are we supporting Scotland's North Sea oil and gas industry, we're also providing £20 billion of funding for further carbon capture and storage, and does want to work and provide clarity for Acorn regarding their future path. But also, I think the honourable gentleman raised the issue of tidal power, and I am pleased to tell him that actually that is now included in the contracts for difference allocations, and there's 40 megawatts of new tidal stream power by 4 projects across Scotland and Wales in the last year. That's this government delivering energy security across the United Kingdom.
Completes questions. Len Saxby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to raise a point of order regarding the honourable member for Twickenham's speech yesterday, in which he raised investment at one of my excellent North Devon schools. This was done without prior notification to myself or the school, and having spoken directly to the school and local education authority this morning, it does appear that the information presented was at best misleading, as the school has an extensive works programme planned to expand the school's capacity, and the timing of future works is being determined around the best interests of the pupils and